Welcome to another Faith in Media podcast with me, Carla, your host, and I'm so delighted to introduce our guest for this episode, Olu Osinoiki. Have I done it correctly?
Yeah, that's it. That's
Come on.
it.
I try to work so hard at getting people's names correct. Welcome to the Faith in Media podcast. It's so great to have you. You're not new. We've had you at our lunchtime prayer breakfast, so it's such an honor to have you here on our podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to get into our conversation today. I love conversation and sharing, so I'm really excited to just be vulnerable and hopefully connect my story to other people.
That's amazing. It sounds like you're going to be in good company, and we just want to hear more about from your story and what you did. As I mentioned earlier, you were in our summer lunchtime prayer. What's been happening on your side in terms of the work that you do since we saw you last?
Yeah, so I think a few shifts in terms of where I'm at as a business. I'm really niching down now. I think Olu Media has long been a what's the nice way of saying it? A mishmash of different services and just opportunities that I've had to do everything from like diversity and inclusion consultancy right through to like shoots for the Guardian and the BBC, and workshops and weddings and everything in between, video. And I'm trying to now hone in on serving a particular audience with a great offer. So yeah, I'm in a rebranding, rebuilding phase.
That's exciting. I think so many people have found themselves kind of in that space. I think particularly subsequent to COVID, where a lot of people reevaluated, what do I want? Am I doing what's bringing me joy? Is this where I'm supposed to be? I
Mhm.
hear quite commonly about a lot of people rethinking about which is the best way to build what God wants me to do through these gifts.
Mhm.
So we know you as a photographer, but how would you identify yourself as someone that occupies media space?
Oh gosh, here's the long list now. I
We're
would
ready
say
for it.
workshop, workshop facilitator, portrait photographer, event photographer, wedding photographer, um, studio photographer, and I've done a bunch of video interviews. What else have I not said? Consultancy, um, as well as like diversity and inclusion. So I think the consultancy is different because it usually comes from like a youth lens. So getting like a younger perspective on X initiative or event or scheme,
Mhm.
um, which has been a really cool opportunity through like a local charity. Um, but yeah, I think that's everything.
That is an
Like as you can
extensive
see,
list.
yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
amazing to
Like
see that you've found a way to kind of bring all of those together.
it came from a time of me just saying yes to opportunities and stewarding whatever came my way the best I could. So, like, I just took everything really seriously. You know, if they were like, come and do this workshop, I'd be like, oh my gosh, okay, how do I make this workshop amazing? Think about it for ages and like plan it out in my head. Or if they're like, come and speak at this event, I'm like, okay, who else is on the panel? What can I say? What will be like a unique perspective in this moment? And just diving headfirst into whatever opportunities I've had the privilege of being given. Um, yeah,
That's incredible. And
yeah.
we've definitely done a bit of peruse around your portfolio when we were researching for this conversation. And there was just so many powerful portraits of family life. You seem really keen to capture the stories through lenses. Where did
Mm.
this kind of start for you?
This was an actually insane story. So I'm gonna start from my uni days because that's where I fell into media. I'd had a whole sixth form, primary school, secondary school experience of trying to be very academic, very fit myself into one of those classic lanes that you see Nigerians trying to fit into. which is being a doctor, being a lawyer, being, a chemist, whatever it is. I thought about all of those at a different point. But I really just had no idea what I was doing. And the most fitting degree for someone who has no clue what their direction is, but likes to think a lot, is a philosophy degree. So
Not the
I did a
easiest one
degree in
though.
philosophy. No, not at all. I was literally just, I was like, because that came from a conversation I did. I studied psychology at um, sixth form, and I realized that my favorite part of the psychology class was the philosophical discussions that we would have, just because our teacher was cool. And I was like, oh, that's not psychology. It's like, no, not really. So that's how I ended up in philosophy. And when I was doing my degree, they taught me what an existential crisis was. I had one. And 1 week later, I basically dropped out of university because I was like, this is
Wow.
not what I want to do. I'm so creative. I need to figure that out. So I started doing these little vlogs on my phone and really just training my eye for media and good visuals because I'd always loved film and TV and immersed myself in that world. But then I was like, okay, it's time for me to do something. And from that, I just met more and more creative people. And one of them gave me an opportunity to shoot some photography at an event that they were already getting paid for, and I ended up getting paid for. So yeah, it was unreal how the silly little opportunities of just making videos with my on my phone led to someone being like, "Hey, you have a good eye, come work with me." Um, and it was just up from there really. When I realized that I could get paid, and I hadn't even properly tried to get paid yet, I was like, "Imagine if I tried." um, so yeah, that's the story of how I kind of fell into the media world.
I love that you refer to there's clearly like some cultural expectation of they call it so. My husband is also Nigerian, and he speaks about growing up in a Nigerian home, the expectation that your children grow up to fulfill the big four career paths. And if that's kind of
Yeah,
something similar that you felt, even thinking about what your next step was, how did it feel when you decided to kind of break away from that norm? Because I imagine like we all have our family traditions, but that sounds like that was quite defining for you, kind of shattering that
yeah.
expectation. What was that like coming out of that space to do what it is that you clearly felt that you were supposed to do?
It was definitely a big deal. And thankfully, I'm so supported now through it all. But I think growing up, the thing that was difficult was reconciling two things. Like, one, this is a real career, people do make money. And my parents are very, as much as they're traditional, they're rational. And
I love that.
you know, through the decision making process, they could kind of see okay, people do earn a living from this. It's difficult, but it's possible. And then the other thing was kind of just growing up. I had undiagnosed ADHD, so it wasn't until I was 18 I realized. So I was more impulsive than most kids. So I'd probably say every month a different career path. And when I just said another one, it was kind of like, okay, Olu, but we've been here before. So that was really difficult. And I had to just show them by working before they really agreed, by just working hard and actually earning money whilst I was at university. In that kind of weird gap where I should have been going to classes, but I probably wasn't. I was, yeah, just trying to earn and get as many cool opportunities as I could, and they could see that I'd put myself in a position where I was going to succeed if I went 100% into this, and I think that's what helped them back that decision.
Did that process kind of, firstly, amazing that you've got such supportive parents. Like you said, they both have really strong values, but at the same breath, that they also are quite open, which I think is such an encouraging thing to have.
Yeah,
Firstly, I can't imagine how challenging that must have been to have had quite delayed diagnosis for ADHD. It certainly, like, I think it means so much when we have a sense of self-knowledge, of understanding why do I do what I do, and
Mm,
then trying to convince others around me, like, especially because what we do, we're never islands, what we do is impacting other people around us, particularly ones that we care about, and not having kind of like put my finger quite on where these things are coming from. So I have so much
mm.
respect for just your patience with that. Did this in any way, kind of this whole process, impact your faith? What was that like, journeying through that kind of place of finding yourself?
Yeah, it had a huge impact on my faith. I think it was such a testing time growing up, especially those years 16 to 18 when a lot of my peers were making decisions and had clear ideas about who they were or what they wanted to do, or clear enough, they had an idea. And I was just so lost, and and really struggling as well with the academic pressure and just the way the system is set up because my learning styles weren't compatible really with the things that I was doing at the time. I'm much more skills based and vocational, and I want to do things, and I learned that way. And I was trying to be theoretical and interested in stuff that I just really didn't care for. And that's hard for anyone. But even with ADHD, one of the um, symptoms that they look for is this kind of disinterest that can't be faked. So if you're not interested in something and you have ADHD, you can't pretend to be interested in it. You can't like because your executive function just works so differently. You can't just be like, okay, it's boring, but I'll do it. You just can't do it um, without some clever tricks and ways to train yourself. So yeah, I was just really really struggling, and God was like the only place I really felt safe and calm. Because you can imagine that as a kid who's struggling and no one knows why you're struggling, so you show up in the world as lazy before a diagnosis. You show up in the world as he's so smart if he just applied himself. And this is the kind of thing that undiagnosed ADHD people hear all the time. Because we are different, but it doesn't mean we're not intelligent. And I think that was the frustration from my parents, who had both done really well academically, and came from families who had done really well academically. It was like, so what's going on with you? Like, everyone else has done this, but I just really, in the middle of all that tension internally, my own shame, my parents kind of not knowing how to handle their first son not being exactly what they thought he would be. Um, I spent so much time in nature and in prayer, and that was some of the best peace that I've ever experienced because it was like the first time. It was like really falling in love with God. It wasn't like someone slapped me with a book and I understood. He literally sat down with me, and I think that was I've had such a deep experience of God since then, but to this day, those those moments in fields alone near my house are just like unmatched in value.
Do you feel like these were the spaces where kind of your creativity just started to kind of forge, and you're like, this is my space, I can dwell here? Do you feel like this is
Yeah.
kind of some of the conception places for what you've now become?
Yeah, no, definitely. Like God, God is such an inspiration to me. The one who created everything always has a unique perspective. Always has a bigger picture perspective than we could ever attempt to have. And he showed me like everything that I was dealing with. It was for a reason. The way that I think and the way that I show up in the world is for a reason, and the benefits of all my setbacks were yet to be seen and yet to be developed, because I didn't appreciate them. I didn't value my own creativity. I didn't value my unique perspective on the world. Um, but I started to, I think, back then, and it coincided with me taking up more leadership opportunities in my youth group, and specifically like creative stuff, so performing poetry and directing dramas and rapping on stage and all these little dancing, all these little things that were like very, very personal to me and intimate. I ended up starting to share with the world, and I think that was the beginning of maybe there's something more for me in this whole creative space.
I love how you shared that you found outlets, and some of that outlet in terms of how both of what God was doing to you, like intimately and personally, he was giving you opportunity in kind of other public places, like, and particularly within family environments like the church, which is wonderful to hear that you had a safe place to go and have an
Yeah,
outworking of things. I know you said there's small things, but leadership in church is no joke, because that's the one
yeah,
place where you get, there is no like prerequisite or a resume that people have to fit into when you come in. It's all sorts of people, all walks of life, a different
mm,
expectation of compassion, a different expectation of grace, a different expectation that we are called to understand one another, to abide in a family environment. And I know that that can come with a lot of associations, because family sometimes can drive me crazy. I won't lie, we find this in churches too. But it's so encouraging to hear that those familial relationships were very real, very safe for you in churches. Could you share a little
mm.
bit about some of those dynamics that really kind of benefited you within that community?
Yeah, yeah, like hugely. I think it's so funny because the benefits of church family are unreal, especially in the face of tension within your own. Because my dad is by no means a bad person. I just think we struggled so much to communicate growing up. So instead of, I don't know, turning to random outside role models who could have been good or bad for me, I ended up with this community of people who were full of compassion and grace and patience, and many of whom had listening ears and would hear me out on all my teenage problems. So I had not just friends and family friends, but aunties and sisters and uncles and brothers and other father figures in Christ, really, who guided me through some of the key decision points in terms of relationships or what I was going to study or how I was going to show up in the world. Um, and that's why I think family is such an important part of my work now, and people, because God didn't create us to exist in a vacuum. And if you're successful and you get all the money and all the power and all the fame in the world, but there's no one around you, there's no way you'll be satisfied. Um, Without God, there's no way you'll be satisfied. But there's kind of a, I think there's a base level of relationship that we all need to exist well and to show up well in the world. Um, so I really benefited from having that community around me because it gave me a different kind of foundation to a lot of the people that I work with now, and a different kind of um, journey emotionally and spiritually, where I recognized a lot of things and started to work on and heal many things that would have otherwise gone unnoticed. Um, so
That's
it's a
incredible.
beautiful, yeah, it's a beautiful journey.
It is, and it is such a joy to hear that that was an experience and a narrative, and one that I think maybe we need more of. I love how you spoke about when maybe the connection with your own biological father wasn't as easygoing. You still had other father figures within this church
Mm,
community. And
mm,
this kind of leads quite, I think, nicely into my next question, which is about, finding godly role models, and particularly male ones in the church. Do you think
mm.
that, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the value that they maybe need to be taking more of a forefront role with their ability to kind of steer and help the direction of spiritual growth within the church
Yeah,
community?
yeah. It's so important. I listed like the broader family figures that I had, and um, like people that I could even stay with at a moment's notice and stuff like that. but there was one person in particular who, Christianity is a lifestyle, and it's a lifestyle I learned from someone, and this someone is Ben Weeks, and I always shout him out. I always talk about him because he's the person who kind of showed me the ropes in terms of what it means to walk in faith, how to love other people, and actually to love myself better, and not be spiraling in shame and anger and a lot of the things that are common for a teenager to be growing up with. And I think the guys, just being around is like so much more of an influence than you can imagine, because you might not even have the insight to know that you're answering a deep question, or you're really encouraging someone by just telling them that they're a funny person and you like to hang out with them. Or it's these small things from someone who's older than you and has no reason to say anything nice to you necessarily. It means so much more. Because when you're a teenager, like studies have shown, you look for that approval, you look for that insight and way to exist in the world from outside your nuclear family unit. So, like, the presence of good, godly Christian men in that time period for teenagers is unmatched. It's just like, it's so important for boys to learn how to be men from men.
I find that it seems to be like an ongoing, I think, urgency and need that we're talking about this even now in modern day. We don't even need to look far, where there is still that cry for godly men or just helpful, healthy male role models everywhere, just to teach us how to show up in the world. And that's not just, I think, for young men, but I think for women as well. There's been some polarizing conversations as well. People are now sitting in different kind of parts of the fence on many issues about almost kind of putting it against each other. But we forget, like, women need to see healthy, whole men that we aspire to be mothers for, raise sons like,
Yeah.
and be good sisters towards, etc., or have really great friendship groups, people that we trust in our community. And vice versa, women also want to show up, but I know that's probably more of a conversation because, statistically speaking, there's just been a kind of a more illuminator that gap is maybe more prominent in some ways. So to hear that you've experienced that is so encouraging, and it's something that we take quite seriously here at Christians in Media with our own mentorship program. In which way is kind of like your great experience of a mentor, like you just mentioned, kind of inspire the work you do? You're kind of falling into lines like that as well, about setting new trends and trailblazing new paths for other people up and coming. Talk to us a little bit about your work in D&I as well, because I know that's a really strong kind of purpose behind that initiative for you. It's showing example, is it not?
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to caveat, like, as well, to your point, because I think you said it so beautifully, but I really agree that it's men and women of equal importance. It's not just that guys should show up and then it's all going to be sorted. There is such different and special ability that is just innate in women to show up in ways that men can't. It's not even worth listing, but there is just a clear difference. And a great analogy that I've heard a lot is how men are like washing machines and women are like dryers. And if you
You
want to
need to
clean your
explain that
clothes,
one. I have
you
never heard of this analogy. Oh my goodness
it's
me.
like it's like okay, cool. If you have dirty clothes and you wash them in the washing machine, but you don't have a dryer, like they're gonna end up dirty again. And if you have dirty clothes and you can't wash them in the washing machine, but you can heat them up in the dryer, it's kind of like you there's a it's like living life well requires two different types of unit that function very differently. And I think you can compare washing your clothes to like living a life. Like you need female role models and you need male role models, and you need them both to show up in their like fullness and not to be like anything but equal. Because I think we all have a masculine and feminine like way of showing up in the world. I don't think men are just, you know, the stereotype of firefighters and chopping down
It's not
trees. Like
static, it's
men,
not linear.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. Like we need all of that experience. But anyway, D and I, um, my experiences in diversity and inclusion have been incredible as a young person, I think, and someone who's uh, less experienced, um, less established. But I've sat on panels with some really cool people who've been working in this like racial activism space for like 30 plus years. I took the last portraits, I think, of Guy Reed Bailey um, before he passed. I was the last like commissioned photographer to go and sit with him and have a session. So I've met some of the greats, and um, it's been an awesome journey. Sorry, I actually just mixed up names. I meant to say Roy Hackett. I also shot with Guy Reed Bailey. He is not passed yet, thankfully, but Roy Hackett has. Um, anyway, it's been awesome, and I think the main thing is that people are people, and a lot of what I've learned from the Bible and my Christian walk just applies to all the diversity and inclusion stuff that I've ever done. And I think ultimately it's about seeing people as people who are people. I don't know. Like,
I think that in itself as an example, even that kind of framing of approach is really important to
mm,
hear.
mm,
Because I think many times when people go into the discussion of diversity and inclusion, firstly, it's such a wide spectrum. People's experience of it, all valid, but also very diverse. And listening to what you're saying is quite refreshing in terms of like, when you're in this space, yes, we're talking about the idea of equity and representation and that it's more equal, but the value that we're amplifying is humans. And if you can grasp that, it makes this journey, this work important, but it makes this journey in terms of it gives us like a compassion space to work from, a grace space to work from. And when race is definitely one thing, but there's also so many different layers to what diversity inclusion can include, including like socioeconomic. The list is endless, gender and all that kind of stuff. But like when you can see people for people, and if one person is hurting, or one portion of kind of our society is not in a place where they're fairly treated, what would be my
mm,
Christian filter to that? And that's why I think there is so much scope to have what you described. That's an example as in itself, and just like we can bring in what God would teach us to do about loving our neighbor right here. And it's got a
yeah,
fancy kind of term in the
yeah.
workplace or in the secular world, but those that occupy that space coming from a Christian perspective, like there is so much relevancy of what God would want us to do in that space. And it's lovely to hear that
Mm,
you are a person that is using that gift, and like you said, your experience coming from your background to kind of facilitate how you navigate that. How would you encourage others like occupying media to kind of navigate that? Because that's a lot about integrity, that's a lot about turning up for actual truth. How have you found you
yeah.
navigating that space, and how would you encourage maybe some of our other young people coming up in media to do so?
Mm. I think the biggest thing is like you can't please everyone.
Mm,
So I think it's such an important place to show up, like you say, in truth, and to be aware that as a Christian, basically, I hold all people in equal value,
mm,
regardless of their background, regardless of their beliefs. I just think no one's better than anyone else, really. And coming authentically to the table, sometimes people champion race more than anything else, or maybe they champion gender more than anything else, or they champion young people more than anything else. And I think there's like a balance that I have as a Christian of like, it's never us versus them. It's always what can, like, what's the most good we could do for the most people
Mm.
in any given context. And I think that's where the heart of all my questioning sort of starts. And for that reason, we usually have great conversations in these spaces as a result, because I feel like that's not a perspective or a lens that people naturally fall into.
Yeah, I think that's incredible, and a great place to start from, because I think many times when we look at that scope or trying to navigate that space, it can be a bit daunting where to start. And particularly being someone who is of faith or someone coming from a Christian philosophy, how do we turn up there? And like you said, it is a lot simpler than we think. We don't have to convince everybody else, but are you showing up authentically? Are you being true? Are you being integrate? Would you say that you're I don't know, a Christian in media, or you just happen to occupy media space, but you're a Christian first? That might be a weird question, but do you understand what I mean?
Mm. No, I definitely understand, and it's something that I'm in a bit of a toss up with that question. Honestly, I haven't really landed anywhere, and I think I've floated back and forth. But where my brand is coming into a place of a bit more permanency, like I'm asking myself the question,
Mhm.
because there's kind of two schools of thought that I see typically is I'm a photographer, I'm also a Christian, and you'll find that out if you work with me. Like, I won't be shy about it. Or it's like I'm a Christian and I'm also a photographer, and I feel like there's value in both. And
Mhm.
I'm actually not sure if it's even one or the other, but I'm figuring out where my conviction is leading me in this season, and I think ultimately how it best serves whoever I'm working with. I think that's the thing that it boils down to is a lot of the disciples that we look up to and are examples to us in terms of how they live their lives were known as tax collectors or fishermen or carpenters or whatever.
Yeah.
They had roles in society and they showed up that way. And I think maybe sometimes for me the temptation has been to label myself Christian so that I don't have to really talk about it, because whereas like maybe if I show up in my work with these values, it might be so contrary to anything you've ever seen that you have to ask me a question. And I think that's like a powerful thing as well. Um, so I don't know, basically.
But I love that you said, like, figuring that out and finding out where do I stand, and maybe it's not one or the other. Maybe it's like, the starting point is, who am I as an individual? What has God made me? And these are the ways in which I'm showing up in demonstrating that. And I think
Yeah,
what that looks like for people is just be true to kind of continue pursuing the person that gave you those gifts in the first place. And I'm sure that answers will come. It's been incredible to talk to you today, Olu. Thank you so much for your time. Before we go, I have one final question, and I think this might be helpful to a lot of our listeners that come across this conversation. What word of encouragement could you leave us for our listeners, whether they're starting out on their media journey, career, or maybe they're seasoned pros? What would you say would be something of encouragement that's impacted you that you can leave with us?
cool. I think the biggest thing at the moment that's on my mind is what's your offer? But you could frame it in maybe more Christian language is like, what's your service? Like, how do you show up in the world to serve
Mm,
others?
mm,
And that has to be when you're entering a media space, your primary focus. You're not going to get anywhere fast if it's your own ego driving your approach to this industry. Everyone who is successful, Christian or not, serves the
mm,
world in some way, and I think that's a principle that Christians need to remember. because sometimes we come in and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to change everything and I'm going to make everyone think just like me and I'm going to do it overnight because I have the power of the living God inside me. And it's like, yes, that's true. But also, no. Not if you don't, not if you don't live it, not if you don't actually show people what that kind of sacrificial, seven-hearted love looks like. Um, so basically, I would say always come in thinking about others as a priority, and people will start to notice that. And I think that's been the biggest unfair advantage in my career so far is that perspective. Um, and always thinking about what's my offer to these people rather than what can I get.
That is amazing. Olu, that's just such a goal that you've left us with, and wisdom, I think, that's kind of timeless. So you answered that one beautifully. Thank you so much. For those that are listening, I hope you've enjoyed this time of encouragement with Olu. You can connect with him via Instagram and Olu Media, and his website, olumedia.co.uk. Olu, thank you so much. God bless you, and all the best for what is ahead.
Thanks for having me, Carla. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekun. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages, and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.